back down the garage again, and I'm gonna fit the cylinder heads. I've just cleaned up all of the bolts. These are the SD1 type bolts. These are the earlier of the bolts, which are non-stretch type. So not to be confused with the Range Rover ones, which are stretch bolts. These ones can be reused, stretch bolts can't. I have got my head gaskets, and I've actually got two different sets, two different types. These ones are the ones that Richard at Turner Engineering gave me. They have the firing actually correctly sized for a 3.5, not a 3.9 like that. So the ones that came in my kit are too big. These ones are the right size. And what's also interesting is the firing is the same thickness either side of the gasket, whereas on this one the firing is about 3mm thick this side and only about 1mm that side, so that's a bit strange. So what have I done? I've cleaned up all the bolts. I'll oil the bolts just to make sure the threads are nice and they torque up nicely. I've degreased the top of the block again, and I've just thread chased the bolts holes with an old bolt with a groove cut through it to make sure it all torques up nicely. So I'll go and get a bit of engine oil, put that on these, and then remind myself of the torque regime. There it is. Working inside out again, 1 2 3 4 5 6 in a diagonal, and then the outer row. On the later Range Rovers they deleted the outer row of bolts altogether, because what was happening was if you torqued them up it would actually cock the cylinder head this way, and they were suffering failures across here. I don't seem to remember that being a big deal with the 3.5s. Maybe it's something on the 3.9s and 4.2s and 4.6s. I don't know, but basically I'm going to do it as per the Rover SD1 book. I might not go mega tight on the outer row because that's saying yeah, 11 to 14, 40 to 50 foot-pound. So they're saying lower torques anyway for the outer row. So I might, well, I'll just probably repeat what they've done. How good does that look? That's the head with new valves, skimmed, all cleaned up. And I think I mentioned in a previous video that, or section of this video in fact, depending on how I edit it, the guides are the original ones, but they were just checked, they were all fine, and the guides themselves got machined to take the later Range Rover type lip ring stem seals rather than the SD1, which just had like a felt washer thing, which was a bit pony, but never mind. I've recently learned from my mate Dan that you can fit opal manta ones which don't require any machining and will just slip over the top, and they're not very expensive either. So which opal manta I'm not quite sure, but it's probably worth googling if you're looking at this. So I'm just going to degrease that, put the gasket on the block on the studs, offer that up, insert all the bolts with a little bit of light oil, and then start torquing them up. So that's one bank done, all torqued up. I forgot to say that this cylinder head has been marked with a temperature sticker and a little warranty tag. So if it cooks up, the company that put it together for me know that it's not their fault. It's because I've overheated it. So now you know what those are if you see them on engines for sale on eBay. And there we have it with the heads on. That all torqued up really nicely. Just sometimes when you torque heads up, one feels slack, the other one feels tight or slightly crunchy. But no, that all went on nicely. I could dummy mount the rockers and put all the push rods through, but I don't think I'm going to bother just yet, because I don't want to do them up tight, because I still haven't got that fifth main on, and I want to be able to rotate the engine with the rocker gear on, so that I can do all the gapping or the preload on these and the shimming of the rocker pedestals. So I think I will call it a night there. I never really know how much to show, how much people care about the detail of this stuff, but these are my rocker shafts and rocker gear, which I stripped down and cleaned a while ago. I made an assessment and thought that, yeah, there is some wear on them, but compared to a lot of the others that I've had, it's really tiny. So you can see the indentations where the rockers have been rotating about the shaft, but there's no nasty scoring. That's not, I haven't polished that, I haven't done anything with it, that's just how it looks. So there are witness marks, but it is not worn horribly, hence me at this stage still not committed, but probably going to reuse them. This is one that I kept because it was just about, well, I kept it really for spares, I don't know why I bothered, but you can see this one, there's quite a big step in it, quite a big lip there, and there's some really horrible like graunchy scoring in it. They can get much worse than that. That one's pretty bad as well, you can really feel that with your fingernail, big divot out of it. So that's why I'm differentiating between these ones being usable for me and that being scrap. I can buy new shafts and rockers, but they're pattern part crappy ones, so I'd rather use one, and I've kept all the rockers in the right order, so they'll go back and they should run in together very quickly. The other option is I put new rockers on that shaft, or these old rockers on a new shaft, but the problem with doing that is these are already impregnated, the alley, with the steel that they've ground off the old shaft. If you put a used rocker on a new shaft, you'll just wear through it in no time. So I'm just reusing original on original, matching. And the other slight point, when the rocker pedestals are in the engine and they get clamped down, they actually close up and go oval, so they can be a right twat to get off the shaft in the first place. And then once you've got them off, they don't want to go back on. So I'm opening them up slightly. There's two ways. One is you put it in the vise, you're very brave, and you clamp it and you squish it, but you can just crack them and you won't know you've cracked it. So what I do is put some Preload paper, or Scotch-Brite, in a high-speed drill, and then wang it in and out of there a few times. That does two things. One is it cleans all the crap off, and the other is it opens it up again. And you just accept that when this is back in the engine and bolted down, it will close up and grip. You can't really fuck it up unless you put a big divot through there, and then the oil, rather than being delivered up the shaft, up the pedestal into the shaft, it'll piss out of the sides without getting to the rockers, so be wary of that. Other than that, it's pretty robust. Another afternoon stroke evening and more to do. These are the push rods from the left bank, all numbered with one at the front. So I'm going to clean them all up with petrol and insert them back in the holes, so they're all numbered and I know which rocker they go with, so they should be nicely bedded in with each other. The only thing that's going to be new is the bottom of the push rod into the tappet or the follower, and the upper end into the cup on the underside of the rocker. So, oh no, sorry, yeah, the pad, that's the same, but the pad on the valve will be different. Push rods all installed in the correct order. Now I'm just going to fit the rocker gear, and I was reminding myself that the rocker gear is handed so the rocker shafts have to go one particular way round. This is the earlier SD1 book, and it appears they made a typo, because they're talking about that little notch there on the face of the rocker shaft, where's a spare one? This is an old scrap shaft, but you can see the notch there, so it should be uppermost. And then it says in this book that on the notch must be uppermost towards the front of the engine on the right hand side and towards the rear of the engine on the right hand side. So it's basically contradicting itself. So if you look in the range area manual, which is obviously the updated version, same diagram, but they've corrected it now to say notch uppermost and towards the front of engine on right hand side and towards the rear on the left hand side. So yeah, even the professionals get it wrong. Got the rocker shafts on, nothing's screwed down, it's all just balanced on there really to stop the push rods and followers falling out when I invert the engine. And I need to invert the engine because finally my new crucifix gaskets have turned up, or seals, whatever you want to call them. But surprise to me, they are actually the same design as the ones that the patent part ones, but I just will feel a little more reassured that they're sort of up to the job, being that they're in genuine Land Rover packets. They don't actually feel particularly different, maybe slightly more compliant. These are more compliant than those. But we shall shove them in, see what happens. I might be boring you all to death with this, but anyone out there who's interested, the one on the right is the Land Rover Genuine, the one on the left is the patent part one. You'll notice the actual moulding of the Land Rover one is much more crisp and detailed. The one on the left, which is the patent part one, this one has a lot more sort of excess flash lines on it and stuff. When you feel them, the Land Rover one definitely feels softer. This one feels harder, and it just, you know, when you buy cheap shitty stuff from China, the rubber always falls apart. It feels like that. So I understand what people are saying now. Definitely go for the decent Land Rover ones if you can. Cool. Well, that's pushed into position. Those new style ones are a lot easier to fit than the old ones, especially if you put a bead of RTV on, or sealer or whatever, helps lubricate it. You do need to sort of pre-squish them in and push them in as you're feeding it down, but actually that is so much easier than the original style cruciform ones with the solid profile with the bigger wings on. So now I can finally torque down the rear main cap and put the chain on, put the gears on, time it, and then I can start shimming the rockers. I've just opened the packet for my cam sprocket and chain. That's the original crank sprocket, which has some rather interesting indents in it from the old chain, so that's probably past it. This is the new sprocket with the nylon teeth, same as original, but it doesn't have a very nice feel to it, if that makes sense. There's lots of rough tufts of the nylon hanging off it, and basically I'm gonna see how much a genuine Land Rover one is. Same with the chain. It's a patent part chain, and it just feels a bit loose and wobbly, same as the one I took off. So it's not stretched or anything because it's brand new, it just feels a bit shite. So I'm going to go quit. I'm going to down tools for the moment, leave engine as it is, go see how much that sort of stuff is new, and then make a decision whether I reuse that sprocket and these new but patent part sprockets, or whether I try and buy a new genuine chain and sprockets. Right, it's been a couple of days since I was last pottering in here with this V8 engine, and I downed tools because I basically wasn't happy with my original crankshaft chain drive sprocket because of these indentations in the teeth. I don't know whether that's focusing because I haven't got a viewfinder on this camera, but basically that looked really worn and I wasn't very happy with it. My aftermarket patent part cam wheel just is a bit poo and the nylon teeth are just quite badly formed. And then the other thing was my chain, my timing chain. It just felt like a worn chain, even though it's brand new. It was just real loose and floppy, and I don't know why, but I just felt like it wasn't particularly well made, so I wasn't very happy with that. So I have now tracked down a new, genuine, original Land Rover crank sprocket, which is still in all of its protective wrapping, which has perfect teeth, which can replace that one. You can see the difference there, or I can. Again, no idea whether that's showing up. I have a Land Rover cam gear, which, to all intents and purposes, it is identical, but you can see the tooth profile is actually slightly different. So the aftermarket one has more of a shoulder to them, whereas the original doesn't. It just has a much better feel to it. It's heavier, so bad because it's going to have more inertia, but we're talking gnat's cock, nothing to worry about. But this is just a much nicer casting than that one. This feels like cheap Chinese shitty alley. I don't like it. That's good. And then I have an aftermarket chain, but this came from a dealer, and it's not branded as Land Rover, but it may as well be. It certainly feels like it. But that is, you hold it like that, there is no sag or droop whatsoever. Whereas you do that with this one, it flops all over the place, and it sags and dangles like that. Look how slack those chain links are. So that's not being used. This one will be being used. I mean, it's so stiff, it's just altogether much nicer quality. So I now have the bits I need to connect the crank to the cam and then start timing it, and then I can do my lifter, preload and shimming. Just as a further illustration of the difference between the two brand new chains. Chain on top is the latest one I've bought. One below is the cheap shitty pattern part one. So you know which one I'm going to be using. Before I can do any of this, I need the engine at top dead centre, or the crank at top dead centre. Then I need to turn the camshaft, when I fit the gears, top dead centre firing, so both valves closed. In order to do this, I don't know if there's a smart way of doing it. What I'm going to do is temporarily balance the front cover on, refit the timing pointer which goes on here with the pulley, which I've cleaned off the timing marks, and then rotate it until that lines up, then pull that off, put the gears in, and then time it. So that's one way of doing it. That pointer now is on top dead center, so I can withdraw all that, not turn the crank, and it'll be fine. The other way, which has just occurred to me, is I can measure from underneath where the piston is in its travel, and then rock the engine backwards and forwards until it's basically at its highest point in travel. They should be the same, but just for curiosity, I'm actually going to check that now. So I'm going to pull this off, turn the engine over, and then poke it from beneath. Ooh, just pulled that front cover off again, and then where that horizontal line of that register is, I've just made a tiny mark there so that I can see without the pulley on where my original timing mark was. Now I'm going to turn it over and have a play and see whether I can actually fine tune it by moving the piston up and down. I hope that makes sense. Invented a new technique. Couldn't get a ruler in there. Basically, I've taken the wire out of an old windscreen wiper, threaded that through to the underside of the piston, and I can rock the engine backwards and forwards and then see on here how it moves when the piston is actually at top dead center. So I'm going to play at that now. I've been playing around with that for a while, and basically after all of that, excuse me, my timing mark is exactly where it was when I used the external pointer. So that in itself is quite an interesting learning lesson, that you can just do it from the refitting the cover and having the pointer on there. The marks on here are actually pretty good. So turn it back over, fit the timing gear. Just fitting the keyway, or Woodruff key I think it's called, into the camshaft. Interesting note that I've never clocked before, but it is mentioned in the workshop manuals, is when you fit this somewhere, yeah, check the camshaft key is parallel to the shaft axis to ensure adequate lubrication of the distributor drive gear. So it must be possible then to put that in slightly wonky, and then that can prevent the drive shaft for the distributor, which comes down through here, from getting adequate lubrication. So just a tiny feature of this engine that I wasn't aware. I've just spotted why. That's the drilling that obviously the cam gets fed through the block, through the cam journals, comes out there, and then when this is on, you've actually got a little hole there, and that's what lubricates this end of the chain gear. I've seen, and I think I did it on one of the other engines, drilling holes through here so that oil can drain from the valley and lubricate your chain and gears, but I haven't done it on this one. There are some very slight differences between the instructions in the old Rover manual, which shows the I need something to point with. Again, apologies if you are bored by all of these explanations, but it might help someone, so I'm pointing them out. Top there, you've got a little square impression mark on the crank pulley or sprocket. The cam one, you've got that drilling there. There's no arrow pointers or anything around the circumference of the cam sprocket. Compare that to the Range Rover book, where you've got the same square indent there. You've got the hole drilled in the sprocket, same as you have here, but you also have this additional pointer there. On my setup, this is a 1986 Rover SD1 Vanden Plas EFI. So it's got the square on the sprocket, it's got the triangle on the sprocket here, and the drilling. That is how I'm timing it up. If I move this back one, so that is lined up with that, it doesn't, the sprocket angle doesn't look right. So I'm copying this book because it's closer to the origins of this engine and not the original SD1 book. Here we have the original sprocket, which has a little circular mark, but it's in the same place as the square one. Then this is the aftermarket sprocket I bought, which I'm not using, but again, it has the pointer, it doesn't have the drilled hole. So I'm going for square and pointer, or circle and pointer, ignoring that hole there, and timing it up so that that top sprocket is ever so slightly on the piss, not quite at 9 o'clock position, but just above. And I think that must have been an earlier regime and perhaps slightly redundant, but anyway, if you see a difference in yours, that's probably why. Another small detail, when you fit the Dizzy drive, that annular groove has to go facing the cam. Again, I think that's to do with lubrication. And then we have washer, and somewhere in here, ultra fine pitch bolt. I'll go look up whether that's meant to be thread locked and what torque it is. In fact, torque, blah 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 blah, 60 Newton meters. Doesn't talk about thread lock, so I won't bother. Right, this next bit isn't in either of these manuals. I don't think it's in any Rover manuals. It's all to do with lifter preload. So when these come from factory, the pedestals are bolted direct to the cylinder head, which is bolted directly to the block, and there's no way of adjusting like valve clearances like you would on a sort of BMW or anything like that. If you have original heads that haven't been skimmed, if you're reusing same gaskets, all the rest of it, you shouldn't need to bother with this. However, these heads have been skimmed. I'm using the composite gaskets instead, and the valves have been recut into the heads, which also will change valve clearances. So I've bought myself a lifter preload kit, and what this is a whole series of different shims of different sizes. The idea is you fit these underneath the rocker shaft pedestals, and that moves the rockers up or down and changes the preload. What you're looking to measure is the distance between the top of the bucket in the hydraulic follower and the snap ring that holds the bucket inside. So you can just see down there, there's a snap ring, and you can see the top of the bucket. And if I push this down, you can see that clearance moving up and down. Same with that one. So this kit came from Real Steel, and they say that with their lifters you want clearance of around 0.060 inch or 60 thou. So, or I think Rover say between 0.02 and 0.60. So that's half a mil, that's 1.5 mil. So I need to make myself a little pair of feeler gauges, essentially, one at 0.5 mil and one at 1.5. I did make this before, but I lost it somewhere, so I'm going to do the same operation again. First off, I'm going to actually torque the rocker gear down onto the buckets, and then we can actually see what they start out at anyway. The other important thing about this is that the check should be made with the valve gear fully assembled and the lifter empty of oil. That's why I didn't pre-fill them. Positioned at the lowest point on the back of the camshaft. So each one you want to check, you have to rotate the crank and the camshaft so that you're on the back of the camshaft and there's not any sort of preload on the follower. I have just made myself two DIY type feeler gauges. That one is 0.5 mil. That's made out of an old windscreen wiper arm, the same that I was using to do TDC. That is a piece of wire that I've hammered till it's about 1.5 mil. They're not perfect, but they're enough for a start. And if I mean, you're looking for somewhere between the two, so this is like an idiot's guide of doing it. If that goes in, but that doesn't, then that's about right. So that's what I'm going to do. So I've just rotated it, looking at this first one, which is exhaust for cylinder number 1. Cam is turned. There is an absolute cavern between the top of the bucket and the underside of that ring. So basically there's too much preload. This is forcing that down more than it needs to be. So this whole pedestal will need to come up. I know from having done this last time that, and just visually looking at it, if I pick another one at random, let's pick that one because it's kind of close to being off cam. Hold on. So that one too, again, there's probably like a couple of mil in there. So I am going to pull that rocker shaft assembly off again. This is where it gets tedious because and involves a bit of maths, because you can measure the average clearance, do the maths, and then work it out. What I tend to do is just remove it all, put the middle one in, try it, and then work out whether I need to go higher or lower, and then fanny around for a bit. So just for the hell of it, I'm going to use the middle pack. You get 8 of each shim size. You cannot mix and match shims on different pedestals because you will be twisting the rocker shaft and you'll probably break something. So I'm going to start off with midway and then report back. I think they must have changed the design of these, because the last time I did this you had to be really careful that you didn't
fit a shim the wrong way round and obstruct the oil way. That's the oil way from the cylinder head up into the rocker pedestal, which then lubricates the rest of your gear. I think the old shims, it had the central hole for the bolt to go through, and then it only one side for oil way, whereas now I think they've modified the design somewhat so that you can slide them in, and doesn't matter which way round you get it, it'll not obscure the oil well. Maybe that's it. Obviously as that comes down, you want that still hole there. So that bank's now got the middle set of shims fitted in it. I've wound the camshaft back, so we're looking at this one again, and you can already see how much that clearance has moved up. It's probably still not enough. This is my 1/2 mil one. You can see probably got 1.5 mil, maybe. I'm going to refine this. I need to cut the end down a little bit more and clean all that scrap off it so I don't contaminate my lovely new engine. Right, I've cleaned it up. I've also filed the end down and deburred it, or I thought I'd deburred it, but apparently I haven't. So that little bit of wire I've made up is now about 1.4, 1.5. So this is the baggy end, so we don't want this to go in there, but I have a feeling it probably will. I don't know. You can see how fiddly this is. I'm just using my 0.5 one to put the ring in the right place again. Wrong end. Oh damn it. I think I'm going to have to modify this again. Modified. That might be alright. I can't get that in there. Can I? Right, yeah, that's still in there. So basically I need to bring the rocker shaft up even more. So I'm going to take the shaft off again, take my pedestal shims out and refit the thicker ones. If that's too thick, then I can stack that one on that one and reinsert it, and we should be there. I've modified my little gauge. I've just filed it, so I'm happier that that is actually 1.5. The reason I was doing that is because I'm close now. If I balance that in there, it's just able to slide underneath. So still this needs to come down. So I'm going to take it off again, put the very fine shims in on top, and see what that does. We are getting somewhere. I've reprofiled this feeler as well. So that's my 0.02 of an inch, 1/2 mil, and that just fits under there. And then if I take my 0.06 thou or 1.5 mil, it doesn't. I mean, I can force it in there if I push the bucket down, but it doesn't. So that's, you know, an indication that perhaps that shim pack is correct. Now I just need to go through, turn every single one of these on the heel, check them all, and see that there's no anomalies. If there are, I can either play the shims again, or if I really want, I can take all the push rods out and measure. So although the first ones are fine, they're too tight on a couple back here. So I'm now going to take that off again and see if I can shuffle the packs around so that I end up with something between this and no little shim with the big shim. Right, I've just been inside because I kind of packed up for the end of the day and watched back some of my videos on the GoPro, and I noticed two things. One is I'm crap at explaining things, so a lot of this didn't make sense to me as I was talking about it, and I was the one who was doing it, so God knows what anyone else thinks watching it. The other thing, the GoPro's rubbish at focusing on stuff that you can't really get right up to the lens, whereas the iPhone is quite a lot better. So this is what I was trying to show. That one. That's what I'm trying to feel for the gap between that ring and the bucket. So turn the crank and the camshaft, the whole assembly, until you're confident that you're not on cam, so the cam isn't pushing on the hydraulic follower. It's basically its maximum clearance point, and then shove the feeler gauge or whatever you've got in there, and just check that your 1/2 mil one fits in and out easily, and that your 1.5 mil one doesn't, like so. So I'm happy now that this, I've actually done both banks now, and for me the middle shim of the lot was the one that worked. It's never going to be perfect. You can joggle push rods around, so if you have one or two that are too tight and one or two that are too loose, you could swap the push rods around. I didn't bother because it's worked this way, and I think that's partly because when the heads were done, they were done properly, so all the valve stems are exactly the same height. When I put a steel ruler across the whole lot, they were dead cock on perfect, and that rocker shaft has had minimal wear to it, and I've kept all the push rods and everything in order, so I didn't have any of those kinds of problems. All of mine are kind of consistent, so that bodes well. I'm going to stop the video here because kind of got to a logical point. Basically that's the main parts of the assembly done. Everything else is like ancillary really, and can be done and enjoyed at a later date. So see you later.